So this is going to be the deep dive into Celeb Rose. So light spellcasters is basically a new concept. We haven't really had many good light spellcasters in the past, and we have this new kind of engine in the Celeb Rose. So Celeb Rose Magician is a pretty cool card. We can send one equipped spell card from our field to the graveyard to destroy one face-up level 8 or lower monster on your opponent's field. Then if you have 3 or more spell cards in your graveyard, this card gains 700 attack. So we can pop a monster, and then it becomes 28, which can be useful. But if we don't destroy the equipped spell, instead we could just leave it as a 2400 attack monster because we gain 400 attack from the equipped spell and make it immune to being destroyed by card effects. So 2500 attack and effect destruction protection is pretty good. That's not bad, but it does kind of get beaten by a lot. There are a lot of monsters that can boost themselves over 2500, and anything can just kind of crash into it and get rid of it. So a lot of the time you will probably be using the effect to pop a monster and put this card in the graveyard and gain a little bit of attack boost. So Celeb Rose Witch is the next kind of key part of the deck. So if we have a Celeb Rose Magician in our graveyard, we can send one light attribute spellcaster type monster or a spell card from our hand to the graveyard to special summon Celeb Rose Magician or a level 9 or lower spellcaster type fusion monster from our graveyard face up to our field. So this is how we're going to basically facilitate our fusion plays, because this is a fusion deck. Basically, we can get out Celeb Rose Witch, discard any card in the deck, and then bring out Celeb Rose Magician, then use the fusion card to fuse them together into one of our 2 fusion monsters. So we'll go over them. Celeb Rose Luxury Magicians has no requirement, but can special summon a level 9 or lower light attribute spellcaster type monster from your graveyard to your field in defense position. Then, if this card is equipped with an equipped spell, it can make 2 attacks on monsters. The other fusion monster is Celeb Rose Fabulous Magician, which we can send one card from our hand to the graveyard to destroy one face-up monster on your opponent's field, then you can add an equipped spell card from your graveyard to your hand. My rule of thumb generally is if you have Death Wand in graveyard but don't have it in your hand, you generally will take Fabulous Magician, use its effect to get Death Wand back in rotation. That way you can equip it to this and have a 4000 monster that cannot be destroyed by card effects, which is really good. Otherwise, I think Luxury Magicians is almost always the pick, because we can use Luxury Magicians as a 4200 attacker that can also refill our board, which a lot of the time is going to be more useful. So the other thing to take note of is Fabulous Magicians is a level 9, which means we can special summon off of Luxury Magicians. So I feel a lot of players will probably be like, oh, well, I'll make Fabulous Magician first, and then I can make Luxury Magicians afterwards, bring back Fabulous Magician and keep that loop going. That can work, but generally I find that having a 4200 attack monster that can just keep refilling the field is more useful more of the time. So I will generally make Luxury Magicians first, again, unless I don't have access to Death Wand, in which case I will make Fabulous Magicians. So the next card in the combos is Celeb Rose Sorcerer. This is a pretty cool card. We can send 3 face-up light attribute spellcast type monsters from our field to the graveyard, then special summon 1 light attribute spellcast type monster with 2500 or less attack from our graveyard face-up to our field. Then we can set Chaos Magic Scepter Death Wand from our graveyard to our spell trap zone. So this is a really cool card, because if we've set up our graveyard, which is what we're trying to do, we're trying to just fill the graveyard as quickly as possible and then basically use our graveyard as a toolbox. If we can get out Celeb Rose Sorcerer and 2 other light spellcasters, send them all to the graveyard, we can then bring back Celeb Rose Witch, and hopefully, if we have it in the graveyard, Death Wand as well. We can then use Celeb Rose Witch effect to discard a card and bring back Celeb Rose Magician. Then we can flip over our fusion card, use the 2 together into hopefully Luxury Magicians, flip over Death Wand, then we can activate Luxury Magician's effect and bring back something from the graveyard. Now, a lot of the time this will just be Celeb Rose Magician, and if we have a second copy of Death Wand, maybe we use it here to use Celeb Rose Magician's effect to pop a card, or we could bring back Celeb Rose Witch if we have a second copy of Fusion, because if we bring back Celeb Rose Witch, we can discard a card, bring back Magician again, use a second Fusion, and then make another Fusion monster, which is completely insane. We could go into Fabulous Magician, then use its effect if we have another Death Wand engraved, and attach that to that. Now we have 2 big monsters that are basically protected. Or if we didn't have another copy of Death Wand in the graveyard, we could just summon out Luxury Magicians and use its effect again to bring out a Celeb Rose Magician. So that means we could just end on a board of 2 Luxury Magicians and a Celeb Rose Magician, which is a bit bonkers. So as you're probably noticing, this deck requires a lot of light spellcaster type monsters, and because of that, we've basically tried to cram as many in the deck as we can fit. So we have 3 copies of Elegant Aurum Avian. This card is fine. It's discard a light spellcaster to draw a card. Again, wants us to have more light spellcasters, so we want just more and more and more of them, which makes us also feel a little bit deterred from including non-light spellcasters, because it can make the deck feel a little bit less consistent. But the trade-off for that is that we then have less answers. So for example, this deck is lacking in spell trap destruction because we haven't really found room for things like Sea Dragon Knight. So to try and make up for that, we're playing Jointech Rex and the 1 of Magical Stream, because a Stray Magic Cylinder can really spell disaster for this deck. The next card in the deck, Legend Magician. So again, another light spellcaster. We can excavate top 3 of the deck, send 1 excavate monster to the graveyard, shuffle the remaining cards into the deck. So the rest of this effect is basically irrelevant because we're not playing Legend normal monsters. But basically, we just want to get Celeb Magician into the graveyard as soon as possible. And Avian and Legend Magician are 2 really great ways to just try and get it into the graveyard because, again, we want to toolbox the graveyard. We want to just fill up the graveyard, get our big tribute monsters in the graveyard, and then keep bringing them back as much as we want. The Magic Mirror Youth. This card, a lot of the time, is the MVP. Because this card basically lets us toolbox the graveyard again, but it's very specific. It basically only works with Legend Magician, Elegant Aurum Avian, and the primary target for it, Celeb Sorcerer. So we can summon out Mirror Youth. A lot of the time we use its effect to get back Celeb Sorcerer, summon Celeb Sorcerer, use its effect, bring back Celeb Witch effect, bring back Celeb Magician, and the whole combo is going. So, very important card, and Magic Mirror Youth really shouldn't be underestimated. Next is the only real good miller of the deck, and that is Braidblade Reader. We can send a light attribute spellcaster type monster or a spell card from our hand to the graveyard, send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard, and if a light attribute spellcaster type monster is among the cards sent, you can add 1 equip spell from your graveyard to your hand. So again, this wants us to just keep playing more and more light spellcasters because we want to make sure we hit one, so that we can then use the effect and add our equip spell back. So the best way to use this card is to discard a Death Wand that's in itself, because it can discard any spell card, then mill 3, and then just take the spell card that we discarded back to our hand, which basically keeps it in rotation and just acts as a mill 3 for free, which is really, really good. Next up is the other kind of key toolbox card of the deck. So this is Celeb Mage. So if we have Celeb Magician or an equip spell in our graveyard, during the turn you normal summon this card, we can add Death Wand or Fusion from our graveyard to our hand. That means if we're milling or discarding our Death Wand or Fusion, we can then just keep recycling them, reusing them again and again, and then we can keep putting this card back into our deck using cards like Dark Liberation and using cards like Jointech Rex to basically keep reusing itself over and over again as well, and just keep the loop going. For consistency, we have Charis Magic Elegant Change. We can send a light attribute spellcast type monster or an equipped spell card from a hand to the graveyard, draw 1 card, then if you have 4 more monsters in your graveyard, draw 1 additional card. So this card can be a little bit annoying, because if you draw it turn 1, a lot of the time you're not going to have 4 monsters in the graveyard, so you just kind of want to hold it, but that can feel bad sometimes. So we have bricked on this card a few times by opening multiple copies of it, but that should be few and far between, so most of the time this card's going to be fine. We can use its effect to discard something like Death Wand, and then just use Celeb Mage to bring it back to our hand, so there are ways to get around kind of the negatives. So for our Legend spell, we're on Graceful Charity. That is because the deck wants to, again, toolbox the graveyard. We want to be drawing lots and lots of cards to find what we want, and we want to be throwing cards into the graveyard. We really want to be filling our graveyard with just lots of cards so we can trigger all of the effects of things like Braidblade Reader, of Celeb Mage. We want to make sure we have plenty of cards in the graveyard for Dark Revelation. There's just so many things we want in the grave, and we want just the number of cards in the graveyard to be high so that we can use all of our effects as well. Fusion is basically a must 3 of. That's because it is a fusion-based combo deck, and if we don't find all of our combo pieces, we can't do what the deck wants to do, so we just need 3 copies of it. So we have the 1 of Magical Stream, we have the 3 Death Wand. Death Wand is a really cool card because it gives 400 attack, which a lot of the time is actually going to be on Celeb Magician, which will put up to 2500 and make it destruction immune, which is pretty cool. But if it is equipped to a fusion monster, it gains 600 more attack. So on the fusions, it is 1000, which makes our Celeb Fabulous Magician 4000 attack and our Luxury Magicians 4200 attack. Now, the problem with that is having a lot of attack does mean that we are very vulnerable to something like Magic Cylinder. So that can be a bit of a detriment, and this deck doesn't really have a good way to deal with that, which is why we are playing in our basically flex slots, our Magical Stream and our Jointech Rex. So for the traps, again, Dark Revelation doesn't really need any introduction. It's bonkers, it's Mirror Force, and it also acts as our shuffler. It puts all of the cards that we want to reuse back into the deck so we can keep using them again and again. Things like Reader, things like Mage, things like Sorcerer, just so that we can have access to them just again and again and again and keep the loop going. And then Magic Cylinder. Magic Cylinder is, I have a bit of a rocky relationship with this card because the main deck that I find I struggle with is Sea Serpent Maxima, and more specifically the Poseidra and Kraken. Both of those cards basically say they don't care about Magic Cylinder, which makes me want to be maining Torrential Tribute. But I think it's fine to have Magic Cylinder in the main, because if you're playing almost any deck that isn't those decks, Magic Cylinder is fantastic. And if we do play against one of those Kraken or Poseidra decks, we can just side in Torrential Tribute and have that as our main trap card. So the rest of this fusion deck is completely irrelevant. We can't go into any of it. It's just to try and throw our opponent off, so maybe on turn 1 they don't know what deck we're playing. And for the side deck, we have another Jointech Rex. Again, this deck can really struggle with back row. So if our opponent is playing a very heavy back row deck, or we know they're on Magic Cylinder, or something specifically that's really annoying, we have the option to go into Joint Deck Rex to try and help deal with it, but it can be a bit tricky. So Destroyer Dragon Sorcerers, this is pretty good into the Spellcaster Mirror, because a lot of the time they're going to have a lot of cards that can destroy our monsters, but more often than not, we have been using Destroyer Dragon Sorcerers as a way just to recycle monsters and to keep Dark Revelation live, just to try and deter our opponent from attacking and to keep us with the ability to keep shuffling cards. Having Dark Revelation in the graveyard can be quite a big detriment, because if your opponent is on Sea Dragon Knight, which is a very popular card, and we have a Dark Revelation in the graveyard, either from milling or because we've used it, then they can use that to pop our other Dark Revelations that we have on the field. So keeping them kind of in rotation, keeping them in the deck, can be a good way to protect our other ones. The Mirage Dragon, again, this card could probably be in the main deck, and realistically probably should. Like, I mean, arguably you could swap Magical Stream for it, but as is, I've kind of liked it like this, because a lot of the time I don't want to be bogged down with monsters that I can't use for things like Celeb Sorcerer, which specifically needs light attribute spellcaster monsters. So that's kind of why we're leaving it there at the moment. So Talismanic Seal Array, this card again is sort of a must. If you're going against specifically Sea Serpent Maximum, I'd really recommend you just swap all the Dark Revelations out for the 3 Talismanic Seal Array. This basically replaces it as your shuffler, and is, because basically if you're against Kraken or Poseidra, Dark Liberation doesn't do anything against them anyway, because they say your opponent can't activate trap cards during the battle phase, and you need a shuffler as well as a way to deal with those maximums, and Talismanic Seal Array is the best way to do both. 2 of the 7 treasures in it for consistency. We have 2 more Magical Stream. Again, it's really hard to find space. This is a combo deck that basically needs the trap protection. So all of the cards, the spell and trap cards in here are basically combo pieces, except for Magical Stream. This is kind of the one flex slot. This originally was our Magical Stone Excavation, but after playing this deck just a bunch, I found that we just never wanted to use Magical Stone Excavation. If ever there was a spell card in our graveyard that we needed, we generally had access to it, or we didn't have enough pieces to like get the whole combo going. We could get like, oh well, I've got Wand and I've got Fusion, but I don't have any of the monsters, so I can't do anything with that anyway. So we've put this in the side deck for now, but again, depending on the matchup, you might really want it. Traditional Tax, again, really, really good against Sea Serpent Maximum. Again, I think this is going to be a running theme with any kind of deck breakdowns I do, but the Sea Serpent Maximum decks are really oppressive. They can be really, really strong, and they basically force you to react to them. You have to make deck building concessions to make sure you always have an out to them, because a lot of the time, if you're not playing main deck outs, or if your deck just can't get to like a big enough attack value, you're basically at a point where you're like, well, I'm going to just lose the first game, and then I have to side in and hope I can win games 2 and 3. So yeah, that's the deck. It's I think overall, I would rate this deck quite highly. I think this is probably kind of tier 2, kind of top of tier 2. It's not overly consistent, I guess is what I would say. I've played a lot of games of this, something like 20 games. And in all of those games, I maybe fusion summoned maybe just over half of those games. A lot of the time, you end up just beating people to death with Celeb Magician, and that's just how the game sometimes just goes. If you just don't find all your combo pieces at the right time, you just cannot make all your fusion plays. But that's not, strictly speaking, the end of the world. Being able to pop monsters and go up to 2800 means this deck is able to clear most boards. Again, it can struggle with the maximum decks, but like we say, we can quite regularly go into 4200 attack monsters, which can attack over those pesky maximums. It just depends then if they also have the traps to back them up as well, because gaining 1000 attack, destruction immunity, or combat destruction immunity are all really good effects. So again, we can kind of struggle to get over them. But just having a big monster that can't be destroyed by effects a lot of the time is enough to win the game on its own, because a lot of people do rely on things like Dark Hole and on their destruction effects to get rid of your monsters to clear the way to attack you, and their attack generally caps out quite low. Now, the other problem is, because we are making a giant monster that can't be destroyed by effects, it is also weak to the same things that maximums are weak to. So Talismanic Seal Array also hurts this deck quite a lot, but we are playing Dark Revelation to hopefully protect from that sort of thing. So yeah, I think that's it for the deck breakdown. Let's have a look at some replays.